This recording is one of the recordings that cover tissues, and specifically in the discussion of epithelial tissues. And when we talk about epithelial tissues have that characteristic of being very cellular. They have a lot of tightly packed cells with very little material between them. So we have to have a means of holding together. And so today we're going to talk about cell junctions. So it's a way of maintaining the integrity of that epithelium. We're actually going to look at 4 cell junctions. 3 of them are here, and I'll draw the 4th one. So the first one we're going to look at is something called tight junctions. Then we'll talk about desmosomes. And another, in the desmosomes, so tight junctions, so here's a cell here. The tight junctions are going to be involved in holding the cells together like this. Same way with the desmosomes, so there'll be some difference there. So both of these, you'd see something like this. But with hemidesmosomes, I'm going to add that one. Hemidesmosomes. Hemi means half desmosomes. Is the hemidesmosomes are going to attach the underpart to the basal portion of the epithelial cell to the basement membrane. So this, say, here is the basement membrane. Up here is the apical surface. Down here is the basal surface. And so the hemidesmosomes are for attachment at the bottom. And then we'll talk about gap junctions. So we have, again, our cells here, but with the gap junctions, we're going to be looking at kind of, can't draw it, you're going to have some gaps in between the cell. So first one we want to look at are we call tight junctions. So it's just kind of like it sounds, tight. It's a means of holding cells together, but it prevents cellular leakage. So if I have 2 cells that weren't really attached very tightly, something can get in between out here and leak. So because it's so tightly compacted, it prevents leakage of cell. So it kind of makes it relatively impermeable. A good example of where we have very tight junctions would be up in the brain. We call a blood-brain barrier, and the endothelial cells that line the blood vessels in the brain have very, very tight junctions. And these cells here, which are glial cells, which we'll talk about this semester, these are cells that one of their functions is to secrete factors that helps to maintain those tight junctions, so it maintains a blood-brain barrier. It prevents things from the blood from leaking into the brain, because the brain is very excitable. So I don't want a lot of things that could excite the brain. I don't want it to excite the brain. So we have very, very tight junctions. So that's going to prevent certain things from moving across and abnormally affecting function of the brain. Another place that we have a very tight junctions would be in the stomach. So in your stomach, when you're have eaten, you're going to be producing a lot of stomach acid. And I don't want that stomach acid to leak between the cells back into your body, because that could damage some cells. So we have a very tight junctions there in the cell. Plus, we have the added benefit of a lot of mucus that's secreted that lines that stomach too. Now, another type of junction that we want to talk about are the desmosomes. So the desmosomes that you see here is going to be involved in attaching cells on the side. And think of it as more like a button. They kind of refer to more as a button type. It doesn't, it's not as tight as the tight junctions, but it helps to hold those cells together and helps to keep them from being pulled apart. The hemidesmosomes, which you see here, are at the bottom part of the cell. And the hemidesmosomes kind of anchor the cells to the basement membrane. So desmosomes help to keep the cells, the adjacent cells, from being pulled apart. The hemidesmosomes kind of attach that cell to the basement membrane. And just to show you how the insignificance of desmosomes is the cells of your skin. Those are attached by desmosomes. And so if you say you have a sunburn and after a while your skin may peel, and the reason why it peels, like you see here, is because each cell is attached by those desmosomes. Now I'll give you a clinical example of significant of desmosomes. Is there are people with a condition called Pemphigus vulgaris, where they have defective desmosomes. And the idea is that the epithelial cells kind of become unglued and they blister easily. Mucous membranes, like membranes that line the inside of your mouth, or mucous membrane, skin, they tend to blister easily. And so you see here inside the mouth of people with Pemphigus vulgaris. So they tend to blister and ulcerate relatively easily, that you see here, and it is because of defective desmosomes. Now, I personally, if I looked at this picture, if someone hadn't told me that the person had Pemphigus vulgaris, is I would think, because based on his teeth, that he probably chewed a lot of tobacco, and that could cause some problems there in the mouth too. I'm like, oh, we've got some oral cancer going on, but this person actually has Pemphigus vulgaris. So those of you who are interested in dental hygiene, hey, you may have to encounter this. You never know. The last thing I want to mention in regards to cell junctions are gap junctions. So gap junctions allow transport between cells. So they're actually like channels, little gaps in the membranes. Remember, cell membranes are selectively permeable. It's not going to allow a lot of things to go across. But if you want something to get across very quickly that is hydrophilic or polar, let's have a gap junction. So this allows things to be transported from cell to cell very quickly. Good example of where we can see gap junctions. It doesn't necessarily have to be with epithelial tissues, because you can see this with other things. Is I want to show you a slide of cardiac muscle. So in cardiac muscle, I'm going to highlight them in green. Here, what you look at there, you see here and there and right there. There's more other. There's one right there. Is what you see there are intercalated discs. So intercalated discs, what they actually are, they're comprised of two different types of cell junctions. It includes desmosomes and gap junctions. So what's so significant about these intercalated discs? Well, the desmosomes allow the adjacent cardiac muscle cells to stay attached to each other, prevents them from being pulled apart, and the gap junctions allows cardiac muscle to work as a unit, a functional unit. There's a term they refer to as an syncytium, act as one. So we're going to be able to allow ions to move across from cell to cell to allow cardiac muscle, especially like the atrial muscle in your heart, to kind of work together. You have a right atrium, you have a left atrium. They kind of work together as a functional unit. Same in regards to ventricular muscle. You have right ventricle and left ventricle. It allows all those muscle cells to work together, makes it a much more effective pump. So this was a great example of something, a structure that actually is composed of two of the different types of junctions that we talked about. So this is the last bit for the cell junctions and lecture about epithelial tissue.